you so much for clicking on this video today. It really means a lot to me. Today I have a bit of a different video planned for you. So one thing about me is I really enjoy playing fantasy football. I've been playing since I was, I think, a freshman in high school, so about 7, 8 years ago now. And I'm in a league with my friends, and me and my friends, we all play together, and we text about it all the time, and I watch a lot of YouTube content about fantasy football. I follow some Instagram accounts. Long story short, fantasy football takes up much more time in my life than it should. And so I was thinking, since the football season is quickly approaching, that maybe it'd be a good idea to sit down and do a quick video just explaining what fantasy football is all about, just in case anyone is curious. Maybe you have a partner or a friend who's really into it and you want to just know what the hell they're talking about. Or maybe you want to start getting into it yourself. Or perhaps you just want to listen to some whisper ASMR and don't really care about the words that I'm saying. Either way, I am glad you're here, and I hope that this video proves useful or entertaining for you. So, before getting into the basics of fantasy football, I think it's a good idea to start with the basics of real life football and what that's all about. So, real life football, American football. The league is called the NFL, the National Football League. And in the league, there are 32 different teams who are spread all across the country. Some states have multiple teams, some states have no teams at all. And every team has 53 players on it. And simply put, the goal of every game is to score more points than the other team. And each team plays 17 games in a year. And at the end of those 17 games, the teams who have won the most go on to the playoffs. And in those playoffs, every round is super intense because whoever wins the matchup will go on to the next round, and whoever loses, their season is over immediately. It makes it really exciting that way because there's just so much at stake in each playoff game, even in the regular season, which is what those first 17 games are called. There's always a lot on the line. And since it all comes down to one game, I find that football, compared to other sports, has a lot more upset victories, meaning like the underdog wins a lot more than in other cases, just because whereas in basketball they play 7 games, same with baseball, same with hockey, and football they only need to win one time to be victorious. And because of that, you see some big surprises in my opinion, which makes it quite exciting. And so, in the playoffs, like I said, one team wins and moves on to the next round, and the losing team goes home. And the teams battle in that format until only 2 teams remain. And that is called the Super Bowl, which I'm sure that many of you have heard of. This past year, it was the Kansas City Chiefs versus the Philadelphia Eagles in the Super Bowl. And the Eagles won the game pretty easily, actually. It was still fun to watch because, it's the Super Bowl, but it wasn't a very close game. And so, going into this next year, this upcoming year, the Eagles are the reigning champions. Now, fantasy football is quite different from real life football, although it is based Josh Allen, Travis Kelce, um, who else is pretty famous? We can have Jamar Chase and Saquon Barkley and Stephon Diggs. You could have all those guys on your same fantasy football roster, even though they all play for different teams in real life, which makes it pretty fun because you could make all these obscure collection of players, your favorite guys, that would likely never exist in real life. And so the way that it works, fantasy football, is every year begins with a draft. And to put it simply, a draft is when you get together with all of your friends who are in the same league together, mostly except 10 to 12 people. Personally, I play with 10 people. And so the 10 of us get together and we decide in what order we're going to draft, who gets the first pick, the second pick, etc. And you spend that time using what you think will occur in the upcoming season, players that you like more than others, and you pick what players you want to put on your team. And then the guys after you, the other people in the league, they'll choose next and next and next and so on until it comes back to you again and it's your pick. It's a lot simpler than it sounds. I'm sure I'm not doing the best job of explaining it, but the point is the players picked at the top at the beginning of the draft are of course the ones that are super sought after. So for example, this year, the player that most people project to be going first overall is a player from the Cincinnati Bengals named Jamar Chase. And so after Jamar Chase is taken, now the second person has to decide, well, who do I think is second best? And they'll take that person, and so on. And so the first four rounds really are very important because, you're drafting what the consensus best players in the league are. However, after 40 picks, because, all 10 of you have a pick in each round, the pool of players starts to get thinner and thinner. And this is where skill and knowledge come a bit more in play. Obviously, fantasy football has a lot of luck involved, which I'll get to later, but there is some skill to it. And so in these middle to later rounds, having knowledge of who you think is undervalued is really important. Or just having a gut feeling about a player, like you think someone's really good, but maybe your other people or the consensus doesn't agree. And so you draft, and most leagues you start with one quarterback, two running backs, two wide receivers, a tight end, and one spot that can be another extra receiver or tight end. The only positions that we care about in fantasy football really are the offensive positions that I just mentioned. There are a lot of different positions in real life football. Maybe you've heard of a linebacker or a offensive tackle or defensive tackle. And while in real life football, these players and these positions are super, super, super important, for fantasy football, we don't really use them whatsoever. And that's because fantasy football is solely concerned with the people who throw the ball, run with the ball, and catch with the ball, and ultimately, hopefully, score touchdowns with the ball. Which is why only those positions that I mentioned are the ones that people really care about. And so, after you draft, you have your starter players, your starting players, which are usually the players that you drafted in the first 7 to 8 rounds. And then you have your bench, which is your backup players, the players you drafted later who, in the event of an injury to one of your starters, might come in and start for you at some point, which is very similar to real life football in that sense. And so the results of these fantasy football matchups are very dependent on what happens in the real life football game. So, for example, I'll use some common players that maybe most of you will know. If I have, let's say, Travis Kelce on my fantasy football team, he's my starting tight end. If he goes out and in real life he scores a touchdown and he catches 6 passes and he runs for another 70 yards, all of those good things that he did translate to more points for my fantasy football team. Whereas let's say he has a bad game, let's say he only catches 2 passes and he only runs for 10 yards and he doesn't score a touchdown. If he does poorly, then that reflects poorly on my fantasy team. And all of these metrics add up to certain points. So for example, if Travis Kelce scores a touchdown in real life on my fantasy team, that equals 6 points. If he catches a ball, it's equal to either 1 point or half point, depending on what league you're in, for each catch. And if he runs for 100 yards, well, that's equal to 10 points. And of course, this is also equal in the opposite sense if he did bad. So going back to that example where he only had 2 catches for 10 yards, that's only a 2-point performance in fantasy compared to in the other scenario where I'm not going to do the math, but it'd be a lot of points. And so it's like this for every position on your team. Everybody that you start in your matchup is going head to head against the person, against your opponent who started all of his players. And so individually, the individual performance of each of your player and your opponent's players, you add them up at the very end, and whoever has scored the most points at the end of that matchup will be the winner. I find it very entertaining and fun to watch because, well, while I'm a fan of one team and I support my team and I like them a lot, having a lot of players from different real life teams on my fantasy team, it makes me more invested and more caring for teams that I normally, wouldn't care about at all. I wouldn't have much interest in watching usually. And in a way, if my team loses in real life, but let's say my fantasy team wins, well, that feels a little bit better. But of course, that works the other way around too, where if my team loses in real life and my fantasy team loses, well, that's a bad weekend. And so that's the very, very basics of fantasy football. Another aspect to it, though, is trading. And this is, in my opinion, the most fun part of fantasy football. And trading is a very simple concept. You and your 9 people other people that you're in a league with, let's say I have 2 really good quarterbacks on my team, but I need a little bit of help at wide receiver. And I have a wide receiver from my opponent's team that I like a lot. Well, I can propose a trade to that opposing team saying, I'll give you this player and this player, or just this player and this player, for agrees upon. And so that's the basics of fantasy football. However, there is another type of fantasy football that I wanted to quickly discuss, and that's what's called dynasty fantasy football. So the big difference, and pretty much the only difference between dynasty fantasy football and regular fantasy football is, in regular fantasy football, at the beginning of the year, you draft your team and you play with them, and either you win, you lose, whatever. But at the end of the year, it's all done. And at the beginning of the next year, you'll draft again a completely new team, and so on every single year. Whereas in Dynasty, you maintain your same roster every single year, which makes it a bit more like real life. It feels like you're a real life manager of a team, and you have to find out what players you want to invest in long term or short term, and which players you don't think will be a good investment long term or short term, whatever it may be. And so in Dynasty Fantasy Football, it's really important to have a lot of vision of the future, which I think adds a whole nother layer of skill that is not really there in the normal fantasy football. Because, for example, I'll use Travis Kelce as an example again. Travis Kelce is a very good player, and he has been a very good player for many years now. However, he is at the end of his career. He's probably going to retire after this season, which makes him not the best asset to have in a dynasty fantasy football league team. Because if you're planning for the future, he's not going to be able to help you past this year. So unless you feel that your team is really, really good and that you can win a championship this year, it might be in your best interest to trade a player like Travis Kelce while he still has some value before he retires. And so that's just an example of another layer of decision making that comes along with playing dynasty fantasy football instead of your normal, what it's called, redraft fantasy football, because you redraft every year. Another key difference between dynasty fantasy football and redraft fantasy football is the draft. So obviously, like I mentioned, in redraft you draft your team every year, and so you go into the year and all the hundreds and hundreds of players you can choose from, old players, young players, whatever. But since in dynasty football you maintain your roster year after year, the draft only includes incoming rookie players. And for those of you who don't know, rookies are players that have never played in the NFL before, but they're entering into their first year. And so typically that means a college player who just got drafted in real life to a football team. And so now in Dynasty Fantasy Football, the draft just includes those young rookie players who are entering their first year. And so the draft is much faster paced because there's much less players to choose from. Maybe not faster paced, but it will go faster because there are less players to choose from. And it requires a different sort of research, whereas in redraft, you kind of know who is who, what players are like, and who's probably good. Whereas in Dynasty Fantasy Football, a lot of the times, these rookie players, these former college players who are coming to the NFL, you've never really seen them before, seen much of them before. And so you have to kind of do your own research, watch them play in college, hear what NFL coaches have to say about them. This whole added layer of complexities. Some players come from the best of the best schools